All right. So in this video, I just want to go over the basics of macros. So what are they? What do they do in the body? And why we might consider focusing on macros. Okay, so macros actually stands for macronutrients. There are three macronutrients, and basically anything that you eat is made up of macros. What it does is it provides the body energy. And more specifically, these are nutritional compounds that the body then uses in order to function. So, sounds pretty important, right? So, this is basically how we take our food and then we utilize it. So, what are these macronutrients? So, you've probably heard of them: protein, fat, and carbohydrates. So, everything you eat is actually most likely a combination of those things. There are some examples of food that are solely, protein or solely fat or carbohydrate. But we would, uh, in general, we're going to say most foods are a combination of those things. When we classify them, we're going to classify them by what they are predominantly. So just because I say, let's say an avocado is fat, doesn't mean that there's not some protein in there. Actually is a very small amount, but there is. There's also carbohydrate in there, but we're going to classify it as a fat because that's what it predominantly is. So I hope that's helpful. Now, I said there's three macronutrients. There's actually a fourth, and we're just going to quickly touch on that, and that's alcohol. So alcohol does provide energy for the body. However, it's not necessary for functioning per se. um, the problem is that the body actually perceives alcohol as a poison. And so, because of that, it's going to prioritize burning alcohol before anything else. So, let's say you intake some alcohol with food. Well, the body is going to solely focus on burning that alcohol off first. Why? Because it's a poison. And then it'll go ahead and get to burning off the food that you eat. So, hopefully, you can kind of imply there why that's problematic, let's say for weight management or even just health in general. Okay, so we're going to focus on the three macros that we need that are important for our functioning. So what I'm going to do is I'll give you some examples of these types of macros, and then we'll talk about what they do in the body, so you can kind of envision, what these foods are doing when you ingest them. Okay, so what the body's going to do is it's going to break down these foods, and then utilize that broken down molecule or compound. So let's start with protein. So most people can identify protein fairly easily. Most of the time, we're thinking about like meats, whether that's beef, poultry, fish, um, eggs. These are all types of protein. Now, if you want, I'll say it like this: the leaner the protein, the more predominantly it is protein, if that should make sense. So think of like ground beef. Let's say you went to the market, you're going to notice there's different cuts of ground beef. So you might see like 80-20, 85-15, 93-7. And all that means is, let's say in the 80-20, 80% of the meat is protein, lean, and the other 20% is fat. So that would be a combo food, right? Where you're getting a little bit of both, but primarily protein, and that's why we would categorize it as a protein. Okay, so let's say like chicken breast is going to be more protein than a chicken thigh. So if that makes some sense to you. Okay, so what is the body doing with protein? So first of all, it's going to break it down. It's going to break it down into amino acids. There are 22 amino acids. 9 of them are essential. What does that mean? It just means that the body can't manufacture it within itself. So it has to come in through the diet. Okay, so these amino acids the body will use as building blocks. So that's how I kind of want you to think of protein. You are providing the body with building blocks in order to repair and build itself. So most people think of protein in terms of like, oh, that's just for people who work out or who want to put on muscle. Not true. All of us are constantly building and repairing ourselves internally. And especially as we age. So as we age, there's just more things are breaking down, and there's more need for repair. So as you get older, it's actually important that you make sure to hit your protein goals, and if not more, to just provide those building blocks for the body. So what is it building? Yes, muscle, but these amino acids are building, repairing muscle, of course, bones, skin, hair, pretty much everything. So you really want to just provide not only enough, but also quality amounts of amino acids. Super important for hormone regulation. That's important. The creation of enzymes to support our immune system. So think antibodies. And it's also available for energy. So it's not the body's preferred source of energy. So we can break down amino acids into glucose, which is sugar, that then the body uses as energy. It's not its first choice just because it's kind of a long and difficult process, but it doesn't mean that's bad. It's just a workaround that the body can utilize. And that's a great thing that we have that ability to continue to give ourselves energy to sustain ourselves. And so that's a little more of an advanced topic we can talk in another video about. Okay, so that's proteins. So let's move on to fats. So some examples of fat, butter, ghee, which is a type of butter. Nuts are primarily fat, although different nuts have different compositions. So some are more carbohydrate based, some are more fat. So if you're looking for more of a fattier nut, that would be like pecans or walnuts. Seeds are also primarily fat. All oils are also fat. In fact, oils are solely fat. So think coconut oil, olive oil, vegetable oil, which I don't really advocate at all, but those are all examples of just pure fat in that case. Okay, so again, there's other types out there. Things like avocados have a high fat content, but they also have carbohydrate and a little protein. So I'm trying to give you examples of very primary, fat in this case. Okay, so what is fat doing in the body? So fat is going to be broken down into fatty acids. Like protein, there are two essential fatty acids, meaning, again, the body just can't manufacture it, so you have to, bring it in via what you eat. Those essential acids, fatty acids, are omega-6 and omega-3. Most of us have heard of omega-3 at the very least. And there's been a big push lately for, increasing your omega-3 for various reasons. But these fatty acids are then going to be used in the body, one, for hormone regulation. So just like protein, we use our fatty acids in order to regulate our hormones, which is really important. Specifically, fatty acids are necessary for the creation of our sex hormones. So regardless of whether you're male or female, you need fat coming into the diet in order to regulate and create those sex hormones, which is really important regardless of whether you're, let's say, as a woman in your reproductive years or not, or even as a man, whether you want children or not. The ability to reproduce is a health marker. And so we still want healthy sex hormones regardless of where we are in our journey. So very, very important there. Fatty acids are necessary for the growth and repair of all cells. So we are literally made of trillions of cells, and every cell has a lipid outside covering. And so that lipid, obviously as fat, is made from the fatty acids that we ingest. So again, you can think of it if we're either on a low fat diet or in taking, less than healthy fat sources, then we're asking the body to use poor material in order to repair and grow our cells, which is super, super important. It's also necessary for vitamin absorption. So if you're taking vitamin A, D, E, or K, you have to have a fat with that in order for the body to absorb it. So if, let's say, you're taking vitamin D, your vitamin D does not have a fatty acid within the actual supplement. You need to take it in like food form. So, take your vitamin D with one of your meals, and that should help so that you actually absorb it. You cannot take vitamin D, let's say, with no fat at all. Otherwise, your body can't actually absorb it. So that's money wasted, basically. So take those vitamins with some fat. Fatty acids are actually very important in terms of managing inflammation. Again, I could do a whole video on that, but you want good quality sources coming in so that you actually manage that that system within the body. We want the ability to inflame, but we also want the ability to anti-inflame, when the injury is over. So again, fatty acids, very vital to that process. And then fatty acids actually can provide a very long-lasting energy for the body. And while it's not the body's like preferred because it's a more difficult process. Once the body can find it, though, the body really, really likes it and will allow um, the body to burn off of fatty acids. So that's a whole other topic in itself as well. But the important thing is to know that it's a great fuel source. I want you to think of it like diesel. It's nice and clean burning, and it's long lasting, and we like that. So, all right, let's talk about the last one, which is carbohydrates. So, some examples of carbohydrates. So, this would be all fruit, all vegetables, starches. So, for example, potatoes, sweet potatoes, rice, things like pasta, bread, oats, corn, cereal, honey, candy, of course, soda, sugar. All of those are examples of primarily carbohydrate. So, you should notice in that list there were some more healthier options and less than healthy, and yeah, so there's a lot of a lot of different variety in terms of carbohydrates. So what are carbohydrates doing? So one, carbs, all carbs, regardless, fruit, veggie, bread, soda, whatever it is going to get broken down into glucose, which is sugar, and then the body then uses that as immediate energy. Now, one, I want to just point out that while there are essential proteins, essential fatty acids, there are no essential carbohydrates, meaning if you were to stop eating them, you'd be fine. The body doesn't actually need carbohydrates in order to survive. Why is that? Because we can use fat as an energy source, and then we said you can even use protein as an energy source. And then both protein and fats are very vital in lots of functions within the body, whereas carbohydrates are not. And so, really, it's just a quick energy source. And that's how we should look at it. This is not to demonize carbohydrates, but to understand that our carbohydrate intake is energy intake, and it really should match our activity level. And I think that's the most appropriate way to kind of think of it. Because it's not doing anything else. You know, we're not using carbohydrates to build muscles, or we're not using it in order to regulate hormones. It's just not something that's essential. It doesn't mean we shouldn't include them. Healthy forms of carbohydrates, so fruits and vegetables, can provide fiber, which is great, vitamins, minerals, all antioxidants, those are things that are definitely important and we want to keep in the diet. It's just not vital, and there's not a need for an excess of them. Okay, so carbohydrates are going to break down into glucose. It's going to be a very fast burning energy. What happens is if we don't immediately use the glucose that comes from the food, we will then store some of it in the liver, and then we can store some more in the muscles, but then we tap out. And unfortunately, we have a very small capacity to store glucose in the liver and muscles. And so anything over that, once those stores are filled, the body will then store it as body fat. And I know that seems like a bad thing, but it's actually a good compensatory, action that the body takes, because it sees it as excess energy. Like, okay, well, we'll just store it away for future use, because who knows, maybe we're not going to have food coming in, later on down the line, and we can just tap into this stored body fat. So this is why making sure our activity levels are matching our carbohydrate intake is important, in terms of, let's say, weight management, and also just overall health. Now, this glucose that's stored in our liver and our muscles is important because we'll go ahead and we'll tap into that, like in between meals or when we're sleeping, in order to keep our blood sugar stable. So lots of people are becoming more and more aware of blood sugar and how important it is to keeping it, even, and not allowing these huge swings, high or low. And so the body has a way to do that by using some of this stored glucose. So that's why we do want to store a little bit of it and have it accessible. So it's super accessible in the liver and then in the muscles. A little less accessible when it's in body fat form, but there are ways, obviously, to get the body to access body fat as well. That's a topic for another day. So when it comes to carbohydrates, we just need to be careful. Again, we are not intaking more energy than we are using. And so focusing on carbohydrates, that are going to at least provide other essential, things that we need, like vitamins, mineral, and fiber, is what's important there. And understanding that, when we do overeat um, high energy carbohydrates, say soda, candy, pastas, those things that we're asking the body to intake a lot of energy and probably not use it all. And so we probably will end up kind of storing that. Like I said, it's going to turn into triglycerides, and then go ahead and be stored as body fat. All right. So when it comes to macros, why is it important? Well, again, these macros are helping the body function, and bringing in enough of those is one important just for health in general. But then also in terms of weight management, we want to make sure we give the body what it needs to function, and then also allow the body to utilize different sources of energy, rather than always having to rely on, let's say, carbohydrate for our energy. So allowing the body to go ahead and tap into body fat as our energy source is something we might want to work on. And so manipulating our macros in order to do that would be one way to use macros to your benefit. You can use macros also to put on muscle. So if that's something obviously you want to do, then you're obviously going to emphasize protein, right? You want to optimize your hormones, and you want to make sure to get in enough quality, um, healthy fat sources. And if you're, let's say, an athlete who's putting out high energy, then you want to make sure you have enough carbohydrate coming in order to fuel your activity, but not so much that you're going to, be putting on weight. You want to use it for what it's useful for, which is, quick energy. So I hope that helps in terms of just understanding macros at a basic level. We'll do another video where we actually talk about, okay, if we're going to take the next step, which is actually use macros, how do we actually weigh and measure them? So that'll be our next video. All right, thanks.